All right, we're looking today at what the ancient Greeks referred to as Ethiopia. And this article is about classic Greek terms. And for the modern country, you see actually just Ethiopia. This is actually something radically different. People nowadays seem to think they're talking about the same small country, but as we'll find, they're not really. And let's continue here. Ancient Ethiopia, or in Greek, it's Ethiopia. The circle with a line, it is a TH type sound, and then that's a pi type symbol. So Ethiopia. Ooh, now you can read a little Greek. First appears as a geographic term in classical documents and references to the Upper Nile region. Well, no, it doesn't actually, but okay, it first doesn't appear there, but let's see where. As well as certain areas south of the Saharan desert. Its earliest mention is the works of Homer. Okay, so this is what its earliest mention, and those aren't talking about in the Upper Nile area. Twice in the Iliad and three times in the Odyssey. The Greek historian Herodotus specifically uses the appellation to refer to such parts of Africa as were known within the inhabitable world. And when they talk about the inhabitable world back then, too, they're not talking about the world. They're talking about the area right around them. Kind of like in biblical terms, too, where Jesus and the devil go up on a mountain and he sees the nations of the world. It's just right there. It's not like everywhere, although we try to look at it all as being everything now. You know, Jesus loves all the people of the world. And although he doesn't really mention any of the other people, and it's not really mentioned in the Bible either, but we would like to think so, and so we try to go with that. Let's continue. In classic antiquity, Africa or ancient Libya is what was referred to, is known as Maghreb, or the south of the Libyan desert in western Sahara, and indeed the whole of Africa that they knew back then, they actually called Libya. And they had gone out into it and found all the wadis and oases that had dried up as the Sahara had dried up. But in doing so, here I'll just show you a picture here real quick. There, you can see that pretty good here, and you can see how this is Egypt running right here, and the Red Sea is the blue running in, and they call pretty much everything Libya. Interesting here, they call this Ethiopians, where you see this on the map. And they talk about Macrobians as being living, long-lived people and stuff, but I think they figured out that that's actually talking about India over here, and where they actually talk about it being a type of Ethiopia also. So let's just get back to this, though. In classic antiquity, though, the Libyan desert in the western Sahara is known as that, including desert land west of the southern Nile River. Geographically, knowledge of the continent gradually grew, though, and with the 1st century A.D. Greek travelogue, the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, describing areas along the Red Sea, or what they called the Erythraean Sea then, which is actually really not that, but all the way out in the Gulf. The Greek's name was Ethiops, or an Ethiopian. It's a compound word derived from two Greek verbs, which is a and weopha, which means atho, or I burn, and ops, which means face. So it's people with a burnt face or sunburnt face, and it kind of meant people that were tanned. And they had this whole thing about people living closer and closer to the equator, how they'd have more tan to them. And basically, these Greeks, anybody that had a skin tone darker than them, they referred to it as in this way. And sometimes, other times, they'd call them by the people's names and so on. So it really comes across to, according to Perseus Digital Library, the designation probably translates as burnt face in noun form or in red, brown in adjective form. So kind of like a tan or a sunburnt type look. It was used as a vague term for dark-skinned population since the time of Homer, and so anybody that had any look to them. So India is called that too, and people out in Yemen, anybody here that's around, you know, you break the topic of Capricorn here and start going down towards the equator, and you're going to have this effect. But you know, anybody from there to actual black people, and so it was applied to such dark-skinned populations as came within the range of observation of the ancient geographers, primarily what was known then as Nubia, and with the expansion of geographical knowledge, successive Sahara. So back then, Nubia here, let's see if they'll show us a good picture. Nah, it's a region along the Nile up at the top part of it there. But so let's look, before Herodotus, Homer in the 8th century is first mentioned Ethiopians or whatever. He mentions that they are to be found at the east and west extremes of the world, divided by the sea into eastern and at the sunrise western at the sunset. And at this time they thought that the sun set right off the ends of the world, and people had mythologies about that. Now, of course, shortly there's going to be a few famous Greeks that figure out the world is round and the circumference and the size of it and so on. And they were really close to the exact right numbers, too, at the same time. But even the Babylonians, and this leads into that type thing, and a couple of vids I'm going to do closely attach a Greek and Babylonian thing, too, attaching another thread or two here for you. But they had a belief that it went between two pillars and so on, and if you were to stand there near those pillars, that you would get burned up as the sun went by, and that people lived in that area had this problem, and all these type of things. In Rhapsody A of the Iliad, Thetis visits Olympias to meet Zeus but the meeting is postponed, and Zeus and the other gods are absent. Visiting the land of the Ethiopians, which apparently is right there by it, Hesiod century speaks of Memnon as the king of Ethiopia. And of course, this is way up north, though. So that doesn't make sense. Well, if you'll just look at the map that we did a minute ago, everywhere that's brown in that map is looked at as being Ethiopians. So they talk about the Egyptians getting a lot darker and the people living here off of it, but never refer to the Egyptians as being Ethiopians, by the way. And they talk about all the people through the Media and Persians area and into the north of India. Some people near the Caucasus Mountains, which we'll get into here shortly. People that are all up through this Bactrian area, and the Scythians that we've been talking about lately, and the Sekasuni. And these people, so apparently anybody who's a farmer, because if you look, this is pretty much primordial farmlands. And so strangely now, people have picked this apart to the point that, well, if they're talking to nobles, they're going to see lighter skinned people, and if they're talking and seeing farmers and so on, they're going to be seeing that. And of course, his stories, he did not go to every single one of these places. But you can see it comes out here all the way through Europe, over Italy, and into Iberia, the Celtic people, you know, and stuff. They're just above it there, and I don't know how they got these thin lines, but and so on. But yeah, let's continue here. Let's go in a little bit. Let's see if I can get this right for you here. Something like that right there. So at 515 BC, Skylax of Carianda, on orders from Darius, first of the Achaemenid Empire, who professes himself to be an Aryan, by the way, sailed along the Indus River and the Indian Ocean and the Red Sea, circumnavigating the Arabian Peninsula. He mentioned Ethiopians, but his writings on them have not survived really. But Hecateus of Miletus, about 500 BC, has also said or written a book about Ethiopians, but his writing is now only known through quotation from later authors. He said that Ethiopia was located to the east of the Nile, not to the west though, as far as the Red Sea and Indian Ocean, and he quoted as relating a myth that the skypods, or shade feet, lived there, whose feet were supposedly large enough to serve as shade. There's a whole lot of hearsay going on, and it's kind of funny. I don't know if people were just making up goofy things, but in a few of his stories here, and we've already gone through it a little bit, he talks about cows with horns so big and point down in front of their face that they have to walk backwards to eat. They have tougher skin and all these type of things, and I think he was really trying to talk about elephants, and he knew what an elephant was. I think these people were pulling his leg. They also tell him over in India that giant ants the size of bigger than dogs farm gold, and then people chase them down and do things. So a lot of this is hearsay, and people take this to be a fact because he's supposed to be the father of histories, but what he is truthfully is the father of hearsay. He has some histories built into there, but then he does go through saying, these people say this, they say this, these people say that. So it's what they say. I mean, he talks to the Ethiopians apparently at the top of the Nile, and they say they're the earliest of people, and then he recants some story about how people came from the sun and where it lands, and so that'd be the first of all people. And everybody says, oh, well, he's talking about above the Nile, but it sets east and west. I think at that point he's talking about India and how dark the people are at the bottom of India. You know, and they don't really show all of India. I'll show you his map in just a second. I just want to go through this, though, first, if I can get through it without talking my way through it. Herodotus tells us that King. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed that. Um, Herodotus presents some of the most ancient and detailed information about Ethiopia. He relates that he personally traveled up the Nile to the border of Egypt as far as Elephantine, which is modern Aswan area. In his view, Ethiopia is all the inhabited land found south of Egypt. So he basically just went up there, it goes to that, like they pointed up there and told him to. So he just kind of does the same thing, beginning at about Elephantine. So they were there, apparently, and just kind of went up there, da da da. And so he describes it that way. He describes a capital at Meroe. Now, Meroe is actually made by the Persians, and it was named for Cambyses' sister. So let's just continue here. Adding that only deities worshipped there were Zeus, Amun, and Dionysus, which is Osiris. And they have the correlation with the two of them together. He relates that the reign of Pharaoh Psamtik, 650 BC, many Egyptian soldiers deserted their country and settled amidst the Ethiopians. So during that time, they had left and gone up there. Herodotus tells us that King Cambyses, in about 570 BC of the Achaemenid Empire, sent spies to the Ethiopians who dwelt in that part of Libya, which borders upon the southern sea. They found a strong and healthy people, although Cambyses then campaigned toward their country. By not preparing enough provisions for the long march, his army completely failed and returned back quickly. But at the same time, there was the suntan people there in the Horn area. In Book 3, Herodotus defined Ethiopia as the farthest region of Libya, i.e. Africa, where the south declines toward the setting sun, lies at the country called Ethiopia, see, and the last inhabited land in that direction. There gold is obtained in great plenty. Huge elephants abound with wild trees of all sorts and ebony, and the men are taller, handsomer, and longer lived than anywhere else. And that is the people in India and the Indian elephants, and describing that as it. And other Greek historians talk about things. The Egyptian priest Manetho listed Kushite dynasty, calling it the Ethiopian dynasty. So they're saying, hey, that's some of those Ethiopians in Kush, and the Bible relates with Kish. And it also talks about how that his son had made the cities there, and those are off the edge of Sumeria, where you have Kish and Kalneh, Akkad, and so on that they mention in that. Moreover, when the Hebrew Bible was translated into Greek, the Hebrew appellation Cush, Cushite became in Greek Ethiopia or Ethiopians, appearing as Ethiopia or Ethiopians in the English King James Version. And I think people misconstrue that always to perhaps mean the little country now that we call Ethiopia, but that hasn't been a country for very long, and it was really called an area and a people that were kind of sunburnt. It wasn't really in that way, and I've just showed you in that brown area. I mean, it's not a dot like we have today. Agartharchide provides a relatively detailed description of the gold mining system of Ethiopia. His text was copied almost verbatim by virtually all subsequent ancient writers of the area, including Diodorus Siculus and Photius. And he talked about these things, about how they collect gold. With regard to Ethiopians, Strabo indicates they look similar to Indians, remarking those who are in Asia, South India, and those who are in Africa do not differ much from each other. Pliny in turn asserts that the place name Ethiopian was derived from one Ethiop, a son of Vulcan, the smith god Hephaestus, and that he would have been burnt from having his face in front of the forge so long. And you look at ancient, metalrites and so on, and your smiths, and they have this effect, and they get a lot of soot to them, a little bit of burnt and more tanned effect to them. But that also shows you he's pointing out that it's South Indians instead of North India that even look this way and so on, right? Now, he also writes that the queen of the Ethiopians bore the name Candake or Candace, and avers that the Ethiopians had conquered ancient Syria and the Mediterranean. And Candace is a title and not actually her name. And when they refer to this Candace, this was actually the name of a queen. It was an appellation that they had put onto queens and so on. And this also is again over in the Persian area that they had come through. Following Strabo, the Greco-Roman historian Eusebius notes that the Ethiopians had immigrated into the Red Sea and are from the Indus Valley, and that they were no people in the region by that name prior to their arrival. So they actually said that there were no people called Ethiopians anywhere around the Red Sea till people came from the Indus Valley area. These suntanned, not the dark ones of the south, people had come over to there, and that would have been your ancient Aryans. In fact, Herodotus tells you in his story that the Medes, the people in this area he's talking about, and the Persians were all called Aryans, and others in this area, until certain people had named them, or they had developed a name, like they hadn't actually, everybody just was called that in the area. And he says explicitly that the Medes were named that whenever Medea had came from Athens, and they changed their name just as Persia had done when Perseus had come. So here's a relation with all that going on. And there were no people called Ethiopians before that time. And of course, Herodotus is, like 400 and something BC. So it's not necessarily back in an elder time either. The 1st century AD Greek travelogue known as the Preface of the Erythraean Sea first describes the Horn of Africa littoral based on its author's intimate knowledge of the area. The Periplus does not mention any dark-skinned Ethiopians among the area's inhabitants. They only later appear in Ptolemy's Geographia, but in that region far south, around the Bantu nucleus of northern Mozambique, according to John Donnelly Fage. These early Greek documents, according suggest that the original inhabitants of Azania, or the Azanians, were the same ancestral stock as the Afro-Asiatic speaking populations to the north of them and to the ancient Barbara region along the Red Sea, like what they call the barbarians, but Caucasians. Subsequently, by the 10th century, those original Asians had been replaced by early waves of Bantu settlers. And I'm telling you now that they didn't actually totally knock them out. Some left, but they interbred with them, and the current population there is about a 40% Caucasian admix, and they say most of that, but not all, came from a long time ago looking at their genetics. So here we have it where we're talking about the Bantu expansion that brought people in there. And people are saying, oh, there was all these people. Oh, the only ones that were really there was these Nubians. Everybody else, nobody else was a Negroid that was really there. And so, yeah, let me show you that there's a few others. Several notable personalities in Greek and medieval literature were also identified as being Ethiopian. Like there actually are gods of the Greeks. I don't know how long you've been with me, people, but the Greek gods were actually gods of the whole area. They weren't from right around this little mountain. In fact, Olympus, I think, is 18, 19 places that they named different mountains Olympus, and you can tell that they moved around a lot. And then, of course, everybody in certain areas had their own Olympus, if you will, or their own special mountain. They included several rulers, male and female, Memnon and his brother Emathion, king of Arabia, Cepheus or Cassiopeia, which were the parents of Andromeda, and apparently these Phoenicians were named as king and queen of Ethiopia. Homer, in his description of the Trojan War, way up there, mentions other Ethiopians. In some cults, the youngest Olympian god Dionysus, his material origins are believed to be Ethiopian, and I can show you in a video about that. I did one here about 3 years ago on Dionysus and his connections to all of the guys around here and who he'd really come from, and statues and misconstruings. Anyhow, Ptolemy the Geographic and other ancient Greek commentators believe that the Ethiopian Olympus was where the gods lived when they were not in Greece. So they lived in other places like that. And so, yeah, I was going to show you the other map that I was talking about, Herodotus' map. So if we look at this map here, you can see if I can get this centered for you here. You can see how over here is supposed to be India. Again, this is the Arabian Gulf here, the Red Sea. Here's Egypt running up here. And they actually had a belief at that time that the Nile somehow turned and ran off to what they called the Atlas Mountains, and it's still called that today. And right next to the Atlas Mountains, of course, Atlas is the mountain's named for the guy that got killed off in the Great Catastrophe and all that, was Atlantis. And so this shows you Atlantis being there. But he talks about Ethiopians being here. Strangely, if you can see it, there's no bottom. There's no sub-Saharan Africa. The horn doesn't come quite out like it's supposed to. This is not, the Arabian Gulf's not made correctly. Tigris and Euphrates look almost correct, but the way the Gulf in the area doesn't look, and he didn't take this by boat and try to chart the edge of the ocean in any way, but nobody really knew sub-Saharan Africa or West Africa, the Cape, nothing existed. But here we have Eastern Ethiopians, listed right on his map there, Indus Valley, boom, and that there's a desert over here. There's the Bactrians and so on, and here we have all these people, the Caucasus Mountains and so on. And he says there's people up here that are that way. And you get far enough up here, and I guess he's starting to run into Mongolians and maybe the edge of Inuit people and things that he's talking about that someone had told him about. He sure didn't go there himself. Well, let's see. Is there another map here? First of all, it goes off an old Sumerian map in the first place where they believe the whole thing was round and it had water going around the whole thing. And this is the way they described it from people's adventures, but they never quite put it together. And let's see. Here's a slightly better version, but man, it's got a bunch of stuff written all over it. But yep, there's Atlantis again. There's Atlantis, right? And Persia. Oh, there's something to show you. See how he calls all of Africa Libya. Libyan, right? And then everything else is Asia. Well, look where he makes sure he puts the A. He puts it over here in Egypt. He considers them to be Asians. See, he puts the A over here, A-S-I-A. Now, you can say, oh, that's just how maps are made. Well, then why didn't he put the A here? There could be A-S-I-A. I mean, there could be, you can spread them out. He spread out Europe pretty damn far here. If you wanted to spread them out, you want to change them, you wanted to make sure the A was only on this side than that. He considered that to be part of Asia. Now, of course, we don't. We know that there's a fault line that runs through here that they actually, easily can tell now we can. And so that must break the continental divide, and that comes right through here at the edge of the Red Sea and across. And now they made the Suez Canal and things like that. There's Babylon, Susa, so on. But yeah, so that's what all the ancients were talking about when they talked about Ethiopia. They talked about a whole lot of different places. They talked about north, south, Caucasus Mountain Range, and so on. Oh, the one thing I left out, I guess, the Colchians, which are right up here. Colchians, and some of his maps, and I think it showed it on that first one I was showing you. But Colchians up there, he says those are the same as the Egyptians, and they go with Sesostris' army. And I'll be showing you something about that here shortly. It'll be one of my vids I'll do to connect to these areas, and it'll also have a few secrets kind of in it. Who Sesostris really is. Some people already know, but a lot of people don't even know who this was. A lot of pharaohs had different names kind of overlapping, and what one people called them wasn't necessarily what another people called them for weird reasons. Anyhow. Ooh, here's Tartessos. So Tartarus goes all the way from here to off the screen over here. Amazing. We'll get back to them shortly, though. Peace. Like, share, and subscribe, guys, and look for the next vid.